Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and in today's video I'm going to take you through our week and show you some of the very frugal, easy, simple meals that we made from our pantry. And if that is something that interests you, why don't you stick around? But first, I wanted to show you how our week started. On Sunday, we had a big family work day. We were working to move our beef heifers over to the far pasture, and all hands were on deck. We had a lot of work to do. This pasture has sat empty since last December, and we have a lot of tunneling critters that like to get in there during the winter. And so I had our big boys out there filling up the little tunnels and holes so that the heifers wouldn't trip on them. Adam was laying some new grass seed in some of the patchy areas. And then I was going around with a bucket and picking up some of the dry aged manure to add to my garden beds for compost. And so it was just kind of a fun day. I love days when the whole family gets outside and works together on projects like this. We also find some bunny nests every year because this area kind of sits vacant, and so we had to relocate those bunnies. And just a fun day out in the sunshine, getting the beef moved to this fresh green pasture. We keep them in the pasture closest to our house over the winter, and in the spring it gets so wet that they really do tear it up and destroy a lot of the areas. So it's nice to now move them into a nice pasture with grass that they'll enjoy eating, and we no longer will need to supplement with hay like we had to through the spring, and we can get the sacrificial area that we used over the winter all cleaned up and growing so that we can begin alternating them back and forth. So there's really something exciting about seeing animals on that grass and enjoying it. It just brings me a lot of joy, and I'm sure it brings them a lot of joy too. So other than that, we've just been cleaning up from the long winter around the property. I'm getting busy in the garden. We just have another week before the plant out date. All of the fruit trees are in bloom, and we're just enjoying seeing all the bees buzzing around and everything coming alive after the long winter. So with all of this outdoor work that we've been doing, we have been working up quite an appetite. And so I thought I would show you some of the meals that we made this week. I show you meals all through the winter during the pantry challenge. Now I'll give you an idea of things that we eat in the spring during this season. It was a beautiful day, and I wanted to grill out some chicken legs on the grill, but I needed to make our side dish for that. So I decided that I would just chop up a bunch of potatoes and vegetables and go ahead and roast them in the oven. This is one of my favorite things to do. It is so easy. You can put any combination of root veggies typically work the best, but brassicas like broccoli or Brussels sprouts work great too. And I just chop them all up, put them in my big cast iron cooker, drizzle them with a little bit of oil and salt, and we could just roast them in the oven, and it is super easy. I added mushrooms on this day, and then we had a little bit of asparagus that I harvested from the garden. And as long as you cut your potatoes small enough, they will roast and soften up at the same rate that the vegetables do. But I wouldn't advise putting whole potatoes in here, or they're going to be crunchy, and the vegetables will be overcooked. So we just chop the potatoes up like this, chop all our veggies up, drizzle it with the oil like I said, or you could use tallow or any kind of cooking fat that you would want. And then you can season them in any way that you would like. I just usually do some salt and pepper, and then we get to taste all the flavors of the different vegetables. For our chicken legs, I sprinkled them with a little Montreal steak seasoning. That's one of our favorite things to put on our grilled meat. And then we decided to go ahead and grill out. And I typically, if it's a nice day, we are grilling through the warm weather months. So any excuse to get out on the grill, and I am a happy lady. And since it was a weekend day and I had a little bit of extra time, I decided to go ahead and make dessert. So I'm going to make some pies. My pie crust recipe is 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 3/4 a cup of fat, whether that's lard or butter or shortening. And then to that, I add 1/4 a cup of cold water, or you could use cold milk. On this particular day, I decided to triple the recipe because I wanted to make 3 pies. But that single recipe that I mentioned will give you enough pie dough for your bottom crust and your top crust. So what I love about pie making is that I spend a lot of time over the summer and the fall canning up pie filling. And then when I want to make a pie, the hardest part of it is simply just rolling out the pie crust. And then it is so easy. I can run down to the pantry, grab whatever pie filling I want, and I have an instant pie. So on this day, I chose 1 quart of apple pie filling, 1 of blueberry, and 1 of strawberry. We also still have cherry pie filling left and a little bit of pear pie as well. So I'm going to need to get busy making pies this summer when we grill out so that we can use up all of last year's pie filling before it's time to start preserving a new batch. And so like I said, this is just so simple. The hardest part was getting the crust ready, and then I could just fill with the filling, because if I didn't have this canned up, chopping all of the fruit and measuring out all of the other ingredients would just add a lot of extra work to this process. But I'm much more likely to bake pie for my family when the filling is already done for me. While I'm getting the tops on those pies, I'll talk to you about what meal planning looks like for me throughout the spring and summer. So I typically try to start my meal plan with our protein source. So I'll pick either, a chicken, pork, beef, fish, or it's a vegetarian meal. And then I center the whole meal around that. And we keep it very basic. So we pick our protein source. I'll pick a side dish that is a starch. It's typically either potatoes or rice or some kind of pasta. And then we will do a vegetable side dish. And those 3 components will make up pretty much every meal that we have over the summer. So it's basically whatever vegetables are available in the garden, whatever meat we feel like cooking up for the day, and then a starch. And then if I have extra time, we will do a dessert like the pie that I'm making on this day, or sometimes it might be a fruit salad or something like that. And so after our pie is baked on 350 degrees for about 35 to 40 minutes, we have beautiful pies, and this is what that big veggie mix looked like. Just so delicious. Not seasoned a ton because we do like to taste all the different flavors of the vegetables and let that be what our taste buds recognize. And we had our chicken legs done, and we were able to sit down for a lovely Sunday night dinner. Like I said, we had worked up quite an appetite that day working around the homestead, and so I think this meal was much appreciated by the family. Something else I tried to do throughout my meal planning in these summer months is to alternate the type of meat that we're having. So in each week I try to do beef, a chicken meal, a pork meal, a seafood type meal, and then maybe a vegetarian meal, and make sure we're hitting all of those within the week, just so that we're not eating too much of one thing. And that process works really well for us. It's a great way to get through what we have in the freezer, and then we pair it with whatever vegetables we have available, and it's just a really easy rotation and makes meal planning very easy for me. So we're going to move on to the pork meal that we had this week. It was a day that I knew I needed to make a crock pot meal, so I grabbed 2 pork roasts the night before, and we had them all thawed up so that I could get them in the crock pot the next day. But the first thing I did was went ahead and seared the outside of those roasts. Then I put them in the crock pot, and this is something that I love to can for pork roasts. It is a vinegar-based peach, kind of like a salsa. It's peach chunks. We have onion, garlic, jalapeno peppers. There's a little crushed red pepper and salt in there. And I just think this flavor, it's sweet and it's vinegary, and it pairs perfectly with the pork roast. So it's, all the flavorings that this roast needs basically are right here in this jar. And I just dump it over the seared roasts, and then we'll add a little bit of salt and pepper, and that is all I need to do. I did this earlier in the morning, and then I can put the crock pot on low and just let it cook all day so that it'll be ready for us in the evening when we need to have dinner. We are usually needing to do a crock pot meal once or twice a week. These are the nights that my kids have activities, and I may need to leave the house during the time that I would normally be prepping dinner. And so it's just much easier to have that protein source already ready to go in the crock pot. It's all cooked up, and it's one less thing that I need to think about as we approach the evening time when I'm trying to get kids ready to get out the door. But earlier in the day, I went ahead and made our starch that we were going to have with this meal, and I decided to make some bread rolls. So I'm going to make my 30-minute roll recipe. I make this for you guys all the time, but today I'm making it with hard red wheat. Hard red wheat is what you would typically want to use for bread baking, or you could do hard white wheat. It's the hard wheat berries that are for bread baking, and then if you want to use soft wheat, that's what you would use for things like muffins and pastries and soft breads. So I got my wheat grinding, and in my bowl here I have my other ingredients. We have our water, our oil, our honey, and our yeast. I'm going to add eggs to that, a little bit of salt, and then we're going to start mixing in our flour. And if you want this exact recipe, I will leave it in the video description. I halved the recipe on this day. So you'll see that I started out with 5 cups of flour in my mixer, and then I get the mixer going, and then I slowly add flour to it to get it to the right texture. It's kind of different every day with the fresh ground flour, and so I start with that base of 5 cups of flour and slowly add. I ended up probably adding another 2 to the mixer, and then let the mixer knead it for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then I get it out and just kind of finish it off myself. Now we can start shaping our little rolls. I just pinch off a little bit, shape it into a little ball, and it's as easy as that. Lately, I always have my little helper up here on the counter with me. She's cheering me on as I'm making food. She's such a joy to have in the kitchen with me. I'm going to be upset when she reaches the point that she's no longer content to sit up there with me. We'll have to get other baby containment devices for her to keep her content in the kitchen while I'm doing my work. We're just going to give a little bit of an egg wash to the top of these rolls, and then we're going to get them in the oven on 425 degrees for about 10 minutes or so, and then they're all done. And this is going to be, like I mentioned, the starch for our pork roast. Now we need to work on the vegetable side. Like I said, I always do a protein, a starch, and a vegetable, and on this day I'm going to make green beans. But I'm going to start with chopping up some onion and getting it into a pan here. Next, we're going to chop our garlic, and I'm so happy that last year's garlic is still holding up and it hasn't softened yet. This is the longest that I've had garlic last in my pantry. So I'm really excited and hoping that we have the same results this coming year because we are running out of garlic. Now we're going to add a little bit of fat. We're going to add a little tallow there, and we're just going to brown up the onion and garlic in a pan. Then after that, I had made pumpkin muffins earlier in the week, and when I strained out the broth from the canned jars, I decided to save it to use for something else later in the week, and this seemed like the perfect time to use it. So this is just essentially butternut squash broth from my canned squash, and I poured about 2 cups of that into the pan with our onion and garlic, and then I'm going to add about a tablespoon of arrowroot powder, and that will thicken it up almost into like a thick sauce, like a gravy, and it's going to be really tasty. We'll add a little salt and pepper, and we're going to end up pouring that over frozen green beans. I think this is the last package of last year's green beans that I preserved. Thankfully, we're going to be planting green beans here next weekend, and shortly we're going to have this year's harvest to enjoy, but this was the last of what we were able to preserve last year. Now I'm going to pour that thickened onion and garlic sauce over the top of the green beans. We're just going to mix it all around, and then we're going to put this into the oven on 350 degrees for about 25 minutes or so, just to get those green beans softened and cooked up. And I did this right before I had to leave so that the children could have this with their roast and roll for dinner. It was just a really simple meal. It's nothing fancy. Some of the kids had peach jam on their roll, and it satisfied bellies on a really busy night of activities. The next meal I thought I would bring you is a seafood meal that we decided to make this week. We typically enjoy salmon and we also love cod, and I like to alternate between the two. And so on this day, we are going to have some baked cod, and it is going to be quite yummy. But the first thing I'm going to do is start out by making some rice. So I have some rinsed rice here, and I have a quart of the drippings that were left over from that pork roast that I just showed you. I'm going to pull the fat cap off of the top of that and set it aside. We'll use it later. And these are just the drippings. This is what was left in the bottom of the crock pot. Look at that beautiful gelatinous broth. It has all the peach and jalapeno flavorings and all of the little meat bits, and just delicious flavors from that roast that we do not want to waste. I'm also going to add the other 2 cups of that butternut squash broth to the rice, a little extra water, and we're just going to get this on the stove and let it cook down. I always figure, why make plain rice with water? If you have some kind of broth or drippings in the fridge, it'll just give that rice that extra flavor that just makes it super delicious. And then the fat cap from that jar, we're going to use that as our cooking fat to make our vegetable side, which I chose on this night to make cabbage. So simply chopping up that cabbage, and then as this warms up, that fat from the roast will flavor the cabbage deliciously. I add a little bit of water in there to kind of help steam and cook the cabbage down. And then, of course, give it some salt. But otherwise, it's just that simple. We love cooked cabbage around here, and I just love it. It's one of the easiest side dishes, side vegetables for me to make. So we'll just, while we're cooking down our rice, we're also working on the cabbage. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to make our main component of the meal, our protein source, which on this day is going to be cod. So I get my cod from Wild for Salmon. This is wild caught Alaskan Pacific cod, and it is super delicious. So I have that in my big Carolina cooker, and I'm going to pour some of the lemon juice that we preserved over the winter that I thawed out. We're just going to pour that over the top of it, give it a nice lemony flavor. And then I am pretty basic here. We just like to use Old Bay seasoning. I think Old Bay seasoning has a great amount of spice and also good flavor, that it just is basically what I use for every type of fish that I make because I know my family loves it. So we put that in, and then I have some pickled garlic here that I went ahead and chopped up. We'll just put a little bit of that pickled garlic on each of the fillets here. We'll just salt it really good, and then this is going to go into the oven on 350 degrees, and it doesn't take very long, just maybe 20 minutes or so to cook up. Now, I did decide to make a dessert on this day as well. We are going to make fruit cobbler. I love making fruit cobbler. I doubled this recipe, but it was 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 a teaspoon of salt, and then to that you add a cup of liquid, a teaspoon of vanilla, and you mix that all up and put your fruit over top. Like I said, I doubled that. And I decided to use the juice from my canned pears that I was going to go ahead and put on the cobbler, and go ahead and use that juice as the liquid in this cobbler. Always gives it an extra oomph and just some amazing flavor. And as I was mixing up those wet ingredients, I decided it needed a little extra. There wasn't quite enough juice in there, so I did add a little bit of almond milk. You want your batter to be kind of runny, but not super runny. And then we're just going to grease up our baking dish here. We have our oven preheated to 375 degrees. We're going to get the batter spread out into a nice even layer on the bottom of the baking dish, and then just place our fruit on top. And I use this same recipe for every kind of fruit. And on today, we're using canned pears and frozen blueberries. And that's going to bake at 375 for about 35 to 40 minutes. Fruit cobbler is pretty much the easiest dessert I can make. I can whip that up in less than 10 minutes and get it in the oven, and it is always a crowd pleaser. I can't recommend it enough. So this is what it looks like. We've got all of our components for the meal ready, and it may not be the prettiest meal or the most colorful meal, but it is super nutritious, and that rice has amazing flavor. The fish has that garlicky Old Bay flavor, and I mean, the kids ate it up. Even little toddlers will eat this codfish. And then everybody, if they finish their plate, they get a nice helping of the delicious fruit cobbler. So that was definitely a win. My final meal of the day, I'm going to go ahead and bring you a vegetarian option we had for lunch this week, and that is sushi. So I started with just some of the random veggies that we had in the fridge. I have my sushi rice, my rice vinegar, and then I had some nori that was in the back of the pantry that I wanted to go ahead and use up. I love making sushi. It's such a tasty lunch. So we're just going to start by getting some of our sushi rice in the bottom of our pan. We're going to fill it with water, and then you want to add your rice vinegar. This is what gives it that tangy flavor and also helps to make your sushi rice nice and sticky. So we're going to get that rice cooking on the stove, and then it's time to start prepping our vegetables. So I just like to cut my vegetables into nice long, thin strips. That makes it easier to load up your rolls. You can use any veggies you want. Another thing, well, today I'm using cucumber, carrot, pepper, and radishes. But another thing that I love to include if I have it in the house is avocado. Cream cheese is great for a vegetarian roll, but since we can't have dairy, avocado kind of is the same as cream cheese. It gives that texture, that creamy texture that sometimes is super delicious in your sushi. Now, I'm obviously not a sushi chef. I'm not a professional at this. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can make a decent tasting roll, but not the prettiest roll. So I'll show you what I do, but definitely you might want to follow an authentic Japanese chef to learn how to do this the proper way. I just lay out my nori, put some of that rice on it, pile in my veggies, and just roll it up the best I can, trying to squeeze it nice and tight so it holds together. And like I said, not the prettiest, but it definitely gets the job done. And so I only had my 4 older kids here for lunch on this day. My little ones were having a day with their grandparents. We had the 4 older ones, and then my 2 little girls. The 3 boys were gone. So this was the perfect amount. For protein, the kids had a side of canned sardines. My kids love sardines and they're super healthy for them. So this is just a lovely warm weather lunch. It just makes you feel good. All of those veggies and the seaweed is just so healthy for you. So make sure you try this summer. Your kids are going to love it. So those were just some of the meals that we had this week. We have been busy in the garden, just working hard for the beginning of this growing season, and I'm excited to bring you along with some more of the meals we make that are going to be coming out of the garden. But that's it for this week. Next week, I'll be back with more of the adventures that we're having on the homestead, and I'm hoping to show you some of the things that we're doing around the outside of the house. Until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will see you back later, friends. Bye.